In your testimony, which, by the way, your voice carries quite well. I was sitting there listening to you, and I thought maybe you should have a voiceover job too, because I was impressed by that. It reminded me of my colleague from Oklahoma, James Lankford. He's got one of those voices too. Not much of a face, but a good voice. No, I'm kidding. Not you, sir. Talking about James. I'm kidding. He's a very good friend of mine. But in your testimony, you stated that reusable packaging companies in the supply chain continue to demonstrate success in responsible management of plastics. How can reusable packaging support the upcycling and recycled plastic content?
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of great activity taking place in the market, and RPA member manufacturing companies as well, taking back 100% of their products from the user community in order to recycle and reprocess into new product manufacturing. It's part of that full circle system, that closed loop, if you will, of bringing back their products. They're of value, so they can use them and regrind in recycled material into other products. They also really look to put high recycled content rates in their manufactured products. One of our member companies has an average of over 80% of recycled content in their pallets and their bulk bins of plastic-based products. So they're achieving really that full circularity in terms of utilizing plastic products, but then getting those products back and continuing to use that material when it's time for its recycling and its intended reuse. For upcycling, it's basically taking the waste material of recycled resin and putting it back into useful products. If you look at the EPA waste hierarchy pyramid, it's going from, excuse me, a lower part of the pyramid to going up from recycling to source reduction of reuse. Or in the circular economy technical cycle, it's going from the outer loop of recycling to the inner loop of preferred activity. So it's really an upcycling process of taking the plastic material and putting them into useful and valuable products that then can go from recycling to reuse or waste management to waste prevention, and allowed to really, get tremendous value associated with the continued life of that product.
How prevalent is reusable packaging in the supply chain right now in different markets, various markets?
Yeah, reusable packaging for the supply chain are the workhorses of commerce. There's an estimate about of all the industrial and consumer products that move in this country, over 90 cents move on a pallet, for example. So they're behind the scenes, but they're ubiquitous in the economies and the markets all around us. It does range pretty considerably between vertical markets. The automotive industry, for example, is a big user of reusable packaging. They've got more tighter loops between parts to assembly, and they definitely have that continuous program in terms of distributing products for their use. The retail industry, that's where you've got a lot of work that's needed. Excuse me, for example, so retail is one that could definitely use some additional, penetration or adoption associated with reusable packaging. So there's great variability associated with the market adoption of reusable packaging for the supply chain.
Well, when we start talking about reusable, which is a great concept, I mean, the chairman brought up the fact that milk deliveries used to be done that way, and I understand that. But every time you touch a product, there's labor cost. And cost is associated with anything that we do. It's got to be economically reasonable for us to be able to do that. And so when we start talking about reusable, you start realizing that the most cost in every product out there is labor. So how do we combine those two? Because each time you touch that product, each time you touch it, every time you touch this bottle, every time you touch a reusable product, there's costs associated with that. So how do you merge those? Because we have labor costs going through the roof here in the United States, which is good. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it also comes with the cost too. So how do you make that efficient for the consumers? Because ultimately, that's who's buying the product. Anybody want to take that on? It's a hard one, right?
No, I'm happy to kick off. It's a great question, and then look for the builds for my co-panelists. There is cost of labor in the production of single-use packaging also today. So they are not limited to only reuse. I think you're touching on a very good point, but you have proof on business modeling exercise, and we talked about it, about business, which at scale are profitable on a reusable side versus single use. And that's because you're also making savings on reusing your asset as many times as you can.
Okay.
I was going to say, this is where scale or volume becomes critical, is because with volume, we're able to drive down the efficiencies at certain touch points, filling trucks up with full loads when they're being transported, say, from point of collection to point of maintenance or back to the packing lines, for example. And so when we talk about scaling reuse, it really is about having that volume efficiencies to be able to optimize the touch points, drive costs down at each step of the way. The unique thing about reusable packaging is that it really brings the supply chain or consumers together with brands, because you all care now about the packaging. The packaging has value to it, whereas today, before with single use, you basically pass that packaging down and you resolve yourself of no longer having accountability or responsibility of it. With reusable packaging, the touch points is everybody's benefiting from the reusable packaging properties that are designed to be able to work within each of those steps along the supply chain. But it really requires that coordination in working in partnership among those who touch the product to be able to optimize those savings as well. And that's where that system thinking comes into play, is to be able to really generate the biggest economic and environmental outcome associated with reuse.
Thank you. I went over my time here. I apologize about that.
All good. Thank you, Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman Merkley, and thank you to our ranking